To Reformed Ex-mormon. I am Pastor. I hope you are having a wonderful and blessed day today. It is a lovely morning here where I live. I'm on my way to work, and I just wanted to make a short part 2 to Matthew chapter 24. Yesterday, we were doing another Amill minute, where a minute doesn't mean a literal 60 seconds, but rather just a short amount of time to discuss a very important topic as an expression of wording. Now, just as Matthew chapter 24 goes, I'm just going to carry on from where we left off yesterday. That was just a very broad stroke of the paintbrush. I would imagine that in the future I would do more of a dive deep and really breaking apart Matthew chapter 24 and trying to get to the meaning of it. I would hold to the redemptive, historical, modified idealist perspective of that text. And within that, I think that there's a matter of a lot of marriage language that's going on, a lot of recapitulatory things that are happening. And then not only this, but there's also, I think, the principle of the known versus the unknown that takes place in this text. And so yesterday where we really kind of got to was Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 through 34, talking about the parable of the fig tree and how that called back to Israel being withered, according to Matthew chapter 21. And we really broke down those parables and leading into the context of what's going on in Matthew chapter 24. Well, we're just going to pick up from verse 36, kind of where we went through how the Father, the Son, and the angels is a calling back to, a hearkening back to Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14, where we see those three main characters, the Father, Son, servants, or angels. And then you see the two different groups of people, Jewish and Gentile. And then you would also see a casting out into outer darkness, which is absolutely talking about what the marriage feast is talking about, hell, final judgment. So as we go into chapter 24, and we see that language get employed again, the nearest antecedent that has those characters in it is Matthew chapter 22. And so therefore, this is recapitulatory again. It's somewhat like if you had a scientist that had a microscope, how they would zoom in on something and then zoom back out on something else and then zoom back in on another area. They would do this a series of times. And that's what's taking place, I would argue, in Matthew chapter 24, is that we have particulars of 70 AD that are taking place, a zooming out that's showing the whole interadvental period, and the unknown of always being ready for the second coming of Christ. So in verses 37 and on in Matthew chapter 24, what we have is that essentially it goes from that unknown in verses 3 through 28 to unknown in verses 36 to the end of chapter 24. And he talks about how these days that are being spoken of will be like the days of Noah. And the reason why I can't say that 24, the entire chapter of 24, is preterist is that was Noah's event a localized thing, or was it a worldwide thing? It was a worldwide thing. It was a worldwide judgment. And so it says that the coming of the Son of Man will be like in the days of Noah. This to me is talking about a major worldwide event. And not only this, but it says that the ones that will be taken are the unrighteous, right? They will be the ones that are taken. One will be left. One will be grinding at the millstone. One will be left. One will be taken. One will be left. One will be working. Two will be working the field. One will be taken. One will be left. And we see in that story of Noah, the ones that were left were the righteous ones that were on the ark. And so therefore, when we look at this, I still can't say that 70 AD because those that heeded the words of Christ in 70 AD, they left. They were taken in that sense. They were the ones that were able to depart from these things. They did not stay in the area that the judgment came upon. Whereas in the second coming, we know that we inherit these things, those that are saved, and those that are condemned are the ones that are taken and cast out. Once again, cast out into outer darkness. And that's what we'd see in the finality of chapter 24 is another time where it says that they will be cast out into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of the teeth. 24 verses 36 and on really talk about the unknown factor of these things. It goes into depth about how no one knows these things, that we ought to look at it like a thief coming in the middle of the night that we are unprepared for, but we ought to be prepared for, that there's no way of knowing when it's going to happen. but just be ready. And to me, this is similar language to what then is going to be employed later on in 25. In chapter 25, there's a parable of the talents, there's a separation of sheep and goats, and there's also the story of the 10 virgins that's talked about in there. Once again, in those stories, it uses that language, especially in the separation of the sheep and goats, which is clearly second coming language. In that chapter, what we would see is that those that are goats that are separated to the left of Jesus Christ, those are the ones that are cast into everlasting torment, everlasting fire. And it even would say in that same chapter, in Matthew chapter 25, that those that do not partake in the wedding feast, that are not prepared, those that did not do with what they had correctly, they are cast into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing at the teeth. Now, if we look back at the nearest time when that was said, that would be chapter 24 in the ending verses, after talking about not knowing the day but always being ready. And that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son of Man, but the Father alone, which once again, that's marriage language, hearkening back to Matthew chapter 22. And once again, in Matthew chapter 22 is when we would see that language again being used, that at the end of the marriage feast, when all the guests are invited, in verses 12 and 13, I believe it is, in Matthew chapter 22, it says that there is one there who is not wearing the approved apparel that the Father has seen. He's not wearing the wedding garments. And so what's happened is that he is cast into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of the teeth. This comes after the invite has gone out. This comes after 70 AD, where in verses 5 through 7, I believe it is, 5 through 7 talk about how the city is going to be surrounded and the whole city is going to be set on fire by the king. That has to be 70 AD. And so what we see in there is Matthew chapter 22, in my opinion, verses 1 through 14, is going to set up the way that we ought to be reading the entirety of these texts. It's recapitulatory. Christ is using parables to talk about this multiple times. He's talking about essentially what's going to take place from the time of his ascension to the time of his second coming, with focusing in on fine details of 70 AD included in there. And so that's where I would say that just how verse 5 and 7 of Matthew chapter 22 is fine details of 70 AD, but the rest of it is talking about the interadvental period. That also, when we go to Matthew chapter 24 and 25, we should see verses 3 to 28 as fine detail, very, very fine detail of 70 AD that's known, avoidable, and visible. But the rest of it is unknown because it's talking about an event that no one knows the date of. And it's speaking of essentially, once again, that marriage feast. That's the language that's being employed over and over again. Anyway, I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that this helps you better understand the recapitulatory, modified idealist position. God bless. Go in peace.